The room was unusually quiet. Samuel was probably so shocked that he couldn't make a sound for a long time. He sat on the bed, hugging the quilt, looking like a little cabbage that had been spoiled, looking at Matthew with grievance and shock. Matthew also felt a bit guilty for a rare moment. After all, it was he who had taken on this task just now. But this time he could swear to God that he didn't have any special preference for Samuel's cross-dressing. It was purely because the score given by the system was too high. After weighing the pros and cons, he thought he couldn't let it pass. But now seeing that Samuel's lips were trembling and looking at him with the kind of gaze one would use to look at a brute, it was obvious that he was morally condemning him in his heart. Matthew cleared his throat awkwardly and comforted Samuel. It's just for one time. Only I will see it. No one else will know. As soon as he finished speaking, Samuel threw a pillow at him. It was soft and didn't hurt. Samuel shouted at him in grief and indignation, "Then why don't you wear it?" Matthew was silent for a second and told the truth. "The system didn't ask me to wear it." Samuel threw another throw pillow at him, let out a wail, and threw himself heavily into the quilt. He had simply not reacted just now. Now his sense of shame was like waves, one wave higher than the other. Compared with this shameless task, even the shadow of death didn't seem so terrifying. Until the next morning, Samuel still hadn't recovered from this shock. During the morning self-study, the test papers of the beginning of term exam were handed out. Samuel had made progress this time and ranked 38. In the past, he would have been showing off long ago, pulling Anthony and the others to brag nonstop. But today he just glanced at it uninterestedly and casually threw it on the corner of the desk. Even when William specifically praised him for becoming more serious recently and asked him to keep it up, he didn't perk up. He even wrinkled his little face. Looking not very happy, William was surprised and asked Matthew, "What's wrong with this guy? He's not happy even though his grades have improved. Does he only feel comfortable when he's at the bottom of the class?" Matthew twitched the corners of his mouth. He knew exactly what was going on in Samuel's mind, but he lied to William without batting an eyelid. He had a stomachache yesterday and didn't sleep well. Samuel looked at Matthew expressionlessly. William said, "Oh, and then, no wonder. I've been telling you guys to eat less from the street vendors at the back gate of the school. The hygienic conditions are very suspicious. You're all high school students already." William seized the opportunity to expound on the topic, centering on the food hygiene issues of the snacks at the back gate of the school, and educated the classmates in the class again. Samuel was sitting right next to him, letting what was said go in one ear and out the other, not hearing a single word. He even blatantly started having his early lunch after William left, eating the rice balls sold at the back gate of the school, which were still warm in the insulated lunchbox. These rice balls were bought by Matthew early in the morning. He knew that Samuel was having a tiff with him now, so he deliberately teased Samuel. "Are they delicious?" Samuel ignored him and took another big bite viciously, then turned his back on him. Matthew wasn't annoyed either. He reached under the desk to grab Samuel's hand. Samuel tried to pull it away but couldn't break free, so he had to turn back around and look at Matthew with dissatisfaction. Matthew chuckled softly and reached out to wipe the mayonnaise from the corner of Samuel's mouth. "You got some here. Why do you eat like a little kid, getting it all over your face?" This scene was caught by Mu Lingling, who had turned around from the front to chat with Samuel. She exclaimed "wow" in her heart and was even eager to take a picture with her mobile phone. However, seeing the look Matthew gave her, she didn't dare to. Samuel finished the rice ball in a few bites, thinking that Mu Lingling wanted to chat with him. He was surprised when Mu Lingling spread a magazine in front of him and asked him, "Can you help me take a look and see which of these dresses looks better?" Samuel almost choked on the last bite of the rice ball. He widened his eyes to look at the pictures in the magazine. There were only girls' clothing combinations on it. The colors and styles were all very cute, and they were all short skirts, showing off their beautifully curved long legs and round knees. In the past, Samuel wouldn't have minded accompanying Mu Lingling to choose at all. He had a good relationship with Mu Lingling precisely because he wasn't as annoying as other adolescent boys who always liked to make jokes about girls. But today, after looking at those beautiful and bright short skirts and then at Mu Lingling's natural-looking face, he asked with great grievance, "Why do you even have to ask me this?" He felt that the whole world was against him today. Mu Lingling was confused. "What's wrong?" "I'm just asking which color you think looks good. I'm actually recognizing your aesthetic taste." "Okay." Matthew couldn't hold it in and let out a short laugh beside them. Samuel gave Matthew a resentful look, then looked at Mu Lingling seriously and said, "You'd better not recognize my taste. I'm color blind." She silently took the magazine back, ignored Samuel, and went to find her girlfriends to continue the discussion. Samuel listlessly finished 4 classes and finally made up with Matthew when school was over. His mother asked him to bring Matthew home for dinner on the weekend. So today Matthew didn't ask his driver to pick him up. The two of them took the subway home. On the crowded subway, Matthew naturally held Samuel in his arms, using his tall body to create a small, stable space for Samuel. Samuel leaned against the railing. There was a smell in the subway that wasn't exactly unpleasant but wasn't pleasant either due to the large number of people. However, Matthew had a very faint smell of sea salt on him, which made people feel fresh and comfortable. He couldn't help but lean closer to Matthew. He wasn't at odds with Matthew anymore. After all, that was an extremely expensive task worth 40 points, more valuable than doing basic tasks for 2 months. Anyway, just wearing a skirt is fine. After all, only Matthew can see it. Hasn't he lost face in front of Matthew enough since he was a kid? When he was 3 years old, he fell into a mud puddle. It was Matthew who pulled him out, but he still couldn't help but tug at the button on Matthew's chest and asked Matthew, "Do you still remember that the highest score for a special task is 100 points? But even a task like wearing a skirt is only given 40 points. What kind of strange task would be worth 100 points?" Samuel really couldn't figure it out. He stared at Matthew with clear eyes. The last time he held hands with a girl, it had to be traced back to kindergarten. So in his perception, holding hands, hugging, and kissing were already very intimate things. He had never even thought about anything more advanced than that. However, Matthew started to cough. He hadn't thought of this problem before. Now that Samuel had reminded him, certain images uncontrollably flashed through his mind, and Samuel was still looking at him in a daze. "I don't know either. Let's see how 007 releases it," he said calmly. Samuel didn't ask any more questions either. 2 minutes later, the subway arrived at the station. Samuel and Matthew walked out of the underground passage together. A light, continuous rain was falling in the air. Matthew had brought an umbrella, and the two of them huddled under the umbrella and entered the house. Lunch had already been prepared at home. It was made by Samuel's father. As soon as Samuel entered the door, he smelled the aroma of beef stewed with tomatoes. While changing his shoes, he shouted at his father, "Dad, did you make salt and pepper shrimp for me?" He had specifically asked for it yesterday. His father walked out of the kitchen carrying a pot. "Would I dare not make it? If I forgot, you'd probably tear the house down." Samuel was satisfied. Matthew also smiled at Samuel's parents. "Uncle, Aunt, I'm here again." His smile was a lot more sincere than it usually was at school. Leo and Emily had taken care of him since he was a child. They didn't treat him as an outsider either. They beckoned him and Samuel to set the tableware together and took the time to ask them if they were used to living in the school dormitory. Matthew answered each question one by one. He also helped Leo cut the vegetables. He was so familiar with it that it seemed like he was in his own home. Emily had packed a few cold dishes from outside. She casually fed Samuel and Matthew and asked Matthew, "Is it delicious? If you like it, I'll buy from this place next time." Matthew nodded. "It tastes good." Samuel asked his mother, "Why don't you ask me? Don't my opinions matter?" Emily gave him a blank look and said, "You like so many kinds of food. If you don't have this one, you'll have that one. There's no need for me to worry about it." While talking, Gianna also heard the noise and rushed down from upstairs. As soon as she saw Matthew in the living room, she let out a scream and hugged Matthew tightly, announcing loudly, "Brother Matthew, I missed you so much." Matthew was used to Gianna's enthusiasm, but he was holding a knife in his hand and couldn't respond. He could only nod to indicate. Samuel was extremely speechless. He poked Gianna and said, "Miss, may I ask if you have noticed that there is another person standing beside your brother Matthew? Doesn't this person look a bit like your own brother whom you haven't seen for a week?" Gianna didn't bother to pay attention to him because Samuel had sent her a message 2 days ago to deceive her that Matthew wasn't coming. She circled around Matthew like a little fangirl, with her eyes shining brightly, and asked, "Brother Matthew, our school will have a cultural festival later. Will you come to participate?" Samuel failed to get his sister's attention and could only say dejectedly, "I might as well give you to Matthew as his sister." Gianna wasn't afraid at all and said, without even looking up, "That would be great," completely ignoring her own brother. Samuel was deeply hurt and strongly felt that there was no place for him in this family anymore. After having lunch, both Emily and Leo still had work to do, so they left first, reminding Samuel and Gianna not to just play around but to spare some time for studying. Samuel and Gianna mumbled their assent, being extremely perfunctory. Then they sprawled on the sofa like two little good-for-nothings, with exactly the same posture, truly worthy of being siblings. Meanwhile, Matthew was in the kitchen squeezing juice for them. In the natural light of the kitchen, he rolled up his cuffs to his wrists, revealing his strong and muscular arm lines, his neat short black hair, and his handsome and indifferent face. Although he was holding a fruit knife in his hand, he looked just like a male model on a magazine cover no matter how you looked at him. Gianna couldn't help it and took a photo with her mobile phone. Then she immediately shared it with her girlfriends. And as expected, it elicited a chorus of screams. As a junior high school girl in the 3rd grade of puberty, she could already clearly distinguish between her brother and Matthew to figure out who was more suitable to be the perfect boyfriend. Although her brother's face was also quite deceptive. When it came to boyfriend charm, he was really 3 blocks behind brother Matthew. She couldn't help feeling a bit worried. Although she quarreled with Samuel every day, as a magnanimous person, she still didn't want to see her brother end up alone. She sighed deeply and said to her brother, "What are you going to do in the future? Will you ever be able to find me a sister-in-law?" Samuel didn't understand. He just thought that Gianna was making fun of him again and said rather unconvinced, "Stop cursing me. Am I not handsome enough?" Gianna looked at him sympathetically and said, "But you only have your face that can deceive people. You can't do housework, and you're not as careful and considerate as brother Matthew. Even if a girl takes a liking to you in the future, once you bring her out to meet brother Matthew, chances are she'll change her mind." Samuel looked at Matthew and then at himself. For a moment, he really couldn't refute. Just at this moment, Matthew had squeezed the fruit juice and brought it to them. Samuel took the opportunity to hug Matthew around the waist and said to Gianna, "That's simple. I'll let Matthew be your sister-in-law. Kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and Mom and Dad will never worry about my studies again." Gianna sneered, "I think you're daydreaming." Matthew almost dropped the tray in his hands, but he quickly calmed down again and asked Gianna, "What are you talking about?" Gianna took the fruit juice and repeated what she had just said. Samuel rested his chin on Matthew's shoulder and pressed, "Tell me, will you be Gianna's sister-in-law?" Matthew lowered his eyes and took a sip of the fruit juice from Samuel's cup. The pears and oranges were mixed together, with a bit of tartness in the sweetness. Then he answered in a low voice, "Sure." Samuel achieved a great victory and looked at Gianna with pride. Gianna was furious. She pounced on her brother and started a pillow fight. The 2 of them were hitting each other on the sofa, neither of them using much force, as if 2 kittens were playfully sparring. It was obvious that they were acting like kids not even 3 years old in terms of their minds. While Matthew was watching them quietly from the side, the smile on the corner of his mouth never disappeared. Emily and Leo didn't manage to come back in time for dinner either. Matthew had originally planned to make crispy fried spare ribs for Samuel, but was stopped by Samuel. "Forget it. If my mom saw me exploiting you like this, she would surely scold me again." When Samuel said this, he was still sitting in Matthew's lap. He had just failed to pass a level in the game, so he crawled into Matthew's lap and asked him to help with the instructions. Now, his eyes still hadn't left his mobile phone. After he swiftly eliminated the last enemy, he finally looked up with a carefree mood. "Let's go out to eat. I'll treat." He then turned his head and said to Gianna, who was chatting with her classmates by the window, "Gianna, are you coming? If not, I'll just take brother Matthew with me." He was deliberately teasing Gianna by imitating her tone to call Matthew brother, which had an unconscious clingy charm. Falling on Matthew's ears, it was as alluring as the delicate and lingering rain, and its lethality was completely different from the brother he always talked about. It made him unable to help himself and his imagination run wild. Gianna quickly ended the call and said repeatedly, "Yes, yes, yes. Don't leave me behind." The 3 of them went to the nearby mall to eat pizza. Mainly it was because Gianna wanted to eat it, and the 2 older brothers indulged her. But after finishing the meal, Gianna went to play with her classmates. Even the good looks of brother Matthew couldn't make her stay. "She lives nearby. I'll be back before 9 o'clock. Gianna promised her brothers obediently. However, Samuel still couldn't feel at ease and admonished, "Call me when you're going to go home. We'll come to pick you up." Gianna stuck out her tongue, thinking that her brother was quite brotherly at this moment. Brother is so controlling. She deliberately teased Samuel, waved her hand to say goodbye to them, and then ran out of the mall entrance in a flash. Looking at the back of his sister, Samuel muttered to Matthew, "It's only because she's a sister. If she were a brother, let's see if I would bother with her." Matthew couldn't help laughing. If it were a brother, he should be more like Samuel. But it seemed that it was very difficult for him to imagine what it would be like to have 2 Samuels. For him, Samuel was unique in the world and no one could replace him. Anyway, it was still early. Samuel and Matthew took a walk nearby. Samuel originally wanted to buy a new pair of headphones. However, in a mall, what was least lacking was women's clothing stores. Samuel followed Matthew from the beginning to the end of the mall. and his steps became heavier and heavier. Finally, Samuel stopped in front of a store that mainly sold girls' clothing. This store was hidden behind a huge plane tree. It was decorated simply and elegantly, and the furniture inside was all of a deep wooden color. At a glance, one might even think it was a coffee shop, but in the window of this store, several sets of beautiful and cute short skirts were on display. Under the soft light, they were enough to attract the attention of any girl. Unfortunately, as a straight guy, Samuel only felt a stomachache at the moment. The pizza he had just eaten seemed to have turned into stones now, weighing down his stomach so much that he could hardly breathe. And Matthew was making things worse by asking him, "Do you want to buy it?" Samuel covered his face. He didn't really want to face this question. The task time given by the system was 3 days. Even if he wanted to buy it online, it would be a bit too late, and he couldn't possibly go and ask Gianna to lend him a skirt. If he did that, Gianna would definitely beat him up and then go and complain to their parents. The only option left for him was to go to a physical store to make the purchase. Samuel plopped down on the bench under the tree, looking pitifully at Matthew and playing the spoiled brat. "Brother, please, don't make me go in." Matthew understood that this meant he was to go in and buy it alone. Matthew didn't mind anyway, since it wasn't him who would be wearing it. Before entering the store, he still asked Samuel, "What style do you want?" Samuel didn't care about that anymore. "Anything will do. I'll wear whatever you pick." Matthew smiled and pushed the door open and walked in by himself. The shop assistant probably rarely saw a boy coming to buy a skirt alone. Moreover, it was such a handsome and tall boy. She couldn't help but look at him a few more times. However, she still maintained her professional quality and greeted him enthusiastically. "May I ask what style the customer wants? Please feel free to have a look." Matthew couldn't tell the difference between these dresses in front of him at all. He said simply and clearly, "Buy a short skirt set, not past the knees. You recommend." The shop assistant couldn't help but laugh and asked softly, "Is it for your girlfriend?" Matthew took a look at Samuel, who was waiting for him under the tree outside the window. He was lying on the back of the bench, like a little dog that had been told by its owner to stay where it was, bored to death and not allowed to run around. The corners of his mouth twitched. "Yes. What's your girlfriend's approximate waist circumference and height? What colors does she like? We have several styles that sell really well. Would you like to have a look?" Actually, when the shop assistant asked this question, she didn't expect to get an accurate answer, because many boys are careless and can't even figure out the size. But Matthew quickly and accurately reported the numbers: waist circumference 68, height 175, likes gray and blue. A few minutes later, Matthew walked up to Samuel with a shopping bag in his hand. Samuel stared at the light-colored shopping bag, his eyes looking as if he was looking at a bomb. He didn't even have the courage to take a peek inside. He scratched his head and asked Matthew dejectedly, "How much was it?" "I'll transfer the money to you." Matthew pulled him up. "Forget it. Do 2 more extracurricular test papers this weekend, and that'll be your thanks to me." Samuel didn't argue much with Matthew either. They had both spent countless amounts of money on each other. He could just buy Matthew a gift later. The 2 men carried the shopping bags, made a detour to pick up Gianna, and then went home together. On the way, Gianna still asked Matthew curiously, "Brother Matthew, what did you buy?" Matthew took a quick glance at Samuel and said calmly, "Your brother's toys." Gianna immediately lost interest. Samuel, however, tensed up all over. Under the cover of the night, he glared at Matthew with dissatisfaction, quietly squeezed Matthew's fingers to make him stop talking nonsense. But the force wasn't painful at all. Instead, Matthew let out a muffled laugh. Now they had already walked to South Lake Lane. There was a wind chime hanging under the eaves of someone's house. The night wind rushed past, making a tinkling sound that was clear and long in the summer. Matthew had originally thought that Samuel would try every means to delay the task again this time. But to his surprise, the next morning, Samuel actually said to him with a solemn face, "I'm ready. It's just a skirt. I'll wear it." A real man will never be afraid of women's clothes. Matthew took a sip of coffee and was surprised by Samuel's positive attitude towards earning points. But this morning, everyone in the Shin family except Samuel had something to do and went out. In this quiet, small Western-style house, only the 2 of them were left. It was indeed a good time to do the task. So Matthew didn't hesitate. He quickly went to the wardrobe, took out the skirt he bought yesterday, and threw it to Samuel. "Then you put it on. I'll wait." Matthew sat down by the window and casually picked up Samuel's homework to have a look. Today, he rarely wore glasses and also wore a V-neck knitted sweater. Looking more refined and mature than usual, Samuel picked up the skirt and looked at it. Although he was mentally prepared, when he grabbed this light piece of fabric, he was still filled with incredulity. He couldn't help thinking that girls only wore such thin clothes in spring and autumn. Wouldn't they feel cold? He didn't avoid Matthew either. He took a deep breath and directly sat on the edge of the bed to start changing into the skirt. Matthew's gaze was originally on Samuel's test paper. Samuel's handwriting was scrawled, and only he, as Samuel's childhood friend, could quickly recognize it. But when he heard the rustling noises beside him, he still couldn't help but look up. The sunlight in the room was very bright. Although the window was closed, the curtain wasn't drawn. Anyway, there were no high-rise buildings around, so no one could see. The warm sunlight poured in through the transparent glass, making every detail in the room clearly visible. The eyelashes behind Matthew's glasses blinked. The skirt wasn't difficult to put on. Samuel had already changed into it quickly. He sat on the bed. His upper body was just a simple white t-shirt, with the hem tucked into the skirt. This smoky gray skirt fit him well, perfectly cinching his slightly slender waist. The length of the skirt could only just cover Samuel's thighs. A pair of straight and slender legs were completely exposed, especially the calves, which were particularly slender, and the ankles were also thin. He stepped on the floor barefoot, with his whole body bathed in the soft morning sunlight, looking so fair that he was almost shining. He was still very embarrassed. He pressed the hem of the skirt with his hands, with a faint blush unconsciously tinting his face. His eyes darted around, but he just didn't dare to look at Matthew. He was very good-looking. This was the first thought in Matthew's mind. He had always known that Samuel was very good-looking. Compared with other boys of the same age, his lines and contours were much more delicate. But indeed he hadn't thought much about Samuel wearing women's clothes. Samuel was just Samuel and could wear whatever he liked. However, he hadn't expected that Samuel would look so good even in such a short skirt. He even suspected that his aesthetic sense had been hijacked by Samuel, because even when Samuel was wearing a skirt, he wouldn't be mistaken for a girl. But strangely enough, he thought that the present Samuel was cuter than any girl in the school. Matthew put down the pen in his hand and walked up to Samuel. Samuel was trying in vain to press the edge of the skirt down, but he gave up after trying for a while. The skirt was really too short. It could hardly cover his thighs, let alone his knees. He noticed a shadow in front of him and then subconsciously raised his head, just in time to meet Matthew's gentle and handsome face, and couldn't help being startled. "What are you doing getting so close?" Samuel asked. Matthew propped his two hands on the bed, just enclosing Samuel between his arms. The tips of their noses were almost touching. If they got any closer, their lips would touch each other. He looked at Samuel, his tone still calm. "Have you forgotten that there are two tasks?" Samuel hadn't forgotten, or rather, he had tried to forget, but because the requirement was so strange, it was instead firmly engraved in his mind. The task required him not only to change into a short skirt but also to let Matthew kiss his ankle. Samuel's face turned even redder all of a sudden. He hardly dared to raise his head to meet Matthew's eyes, and his whole aura weakened by a third all of a sudden. Damn it, he thought belatedly. This requirement seemed even more excessive than making him wear a short skirt. What kind of antisocial personality would come up with such a devious trick to make a tough young boy kiss another boy's ankle? He patted Matthew on the shoulder, not knowing how to comfort him. He could only mumble, "Brother, I can never repay your great kindness. I'll do whatever you ask me to do later." But before he could finish his words, his shoulder was pushed gently but firmly by someone. He fell onto the soft bed without any precaution, with a corner of his pleated skirt lifted up, and he was supporting his upper body with his elbows. Then his ankle was gently grasped by someone too. Samuel's voice got stuck in his throat all of a sudden. He watched helplessly as Matthew slightly lifted his ankle, then knelt down on one knee, turned his head sideways, and placed a kiss as gentle as a butterfly on his ankle. The scene was really strange. Matthew was neatly dressed, so straight that he could go to the podium to make a speech as the grade representative, while Samuel's clothes were in a mess. The last button of his skirt wasn't even fastened, revealing a small patch of snow-white skin on his waist. But it was Matthew who lowered his head to him, in a submissive posture. In the sunlight, Matthew's side face was as handsome as a prince in a fairy tale. Clearly, he had an ascetic and aloof appearance, but when his lips touched Samuel's skin, there was an inexplicable sensuality. While he was kissing Samuel's slender ankle, he looked up at Samuel. That look was hard to describe. His pupils, dyed amber by the sunlight, were like a predator looking at its prey, and also like a lover looking at the rose he had been longing for day and night. There was a boom in Samuel's mind. Blood quickly rushed to his face, his ear tips, and even his neck wasn't spared. Somehow, he felt that it suddenly became very quiet both inside and outside the room. The sounds of traffic and chatter outside the window all disappeared. Only the rustling sound of the leaves swaying outside the window remained. Bit by bit, grating on the softest part of one's heart. He unconsciously bit his lip. His slightly red lips were soft and plump, like a half-ripe piece of fruit pulp. With a gentle bite, a crescent-shaped mark was left. Congratulations, Host Samuel. Host Matthew has completed the task and obtained a special reward of 40 points. The calm and familiar electronic voice suddenly rang in the ears of Samuel and Matthew, breaking the strange ambiguity in the room. Time began to flow again in a hurry, and the faint noise outside the window also started to ring out again. Samuel was startled by the sound and grabbed the quilt beneath him as if waking up from a dream, and Matthew also let go of his ankle. His foot landed back on the ground, neither too lightly nor too heavily, hitting the carpet with a slightly rough texture. Somewhere in his heart, something inexplicably made a small poof sound, like a sigh, and also like a sigh of relief. Did I frighten you? Matthew didn't get up immediately. He still maintained a half-kneeling posture and looked up to ask Samuel. Samuel shook his head in a fluster. He didn't dare to, at all. Imagining himself in Matthew's position, he thought he could beat himself to death. He didn't know which nerve was wrong. He quickly grabbed a tissue from the side and wiped Matthew's mouth, saying in a terrified manner, "Why don't you go and brush your teeth?" Matthew, however, gently turned his head aside, avoiding Samuel's hand. "It's not dirty," said Matthew. Samuel's hand was put down hesitantly again. He didn't know why, but he didn't dare to look into Matthew's eyes very much, as if he knew that there was a Pandora's box hidden inside them. If he stared at them for too long, he would be drawn into an unknown vortex. Finally, what saved Samuel was a ding sound coming from the kitchen downstairs. Leo made a pumpkin pie before leaving and put it in the oven, setting the time for Samuel and Matthew to have as a snack. Samuel, as if grabbing a straw, sprang up from the bed all of a sudden. "I'll go and get something to eat. I'm starving." Even though he had just had breakfast, he dashed out of the room in a flash. Matthew didn't stop him either. When Samuel's footsteps had faded away, Matthew finally lay down on the bed, running his fingers through his hair and messing up the hairstyle that Samuel had accompanied him to get trimmed last time. He knew that, at that moment just now, he must have shown a greedy look, a look that could only be satisfied by swallowing Samuel whole. That was why someone as careless as Samuel had become panicked. He also had to thank the sudden sound of 007, which interrupted his thoughts at that moment. Otherwise, he didn't know if he would be bewitched to kiss more places, starting from the ankles and going all the way up, lifting that flimsy pleated skirt to explore more secluded and hidden places. Matthew hit the brakes urgently and didn't think about it any further. He felt that under this long-term unrequited love, he was almost equivalent to a pervert. Samuel didn't realize that he was still wearing a skirt until he had run all the way downstairs. Fortunately, there was no one at home now, otherwise, he would have been unable to defend himself. But he was a little curious about his own appearance. Wearing a skirt was a bit shameful, but it was also a strange and novel experience that he had never had in his life, although he was too shy to say it out loud now. Maybe when he was in his 70s or 80s, he might tell it to his grandchildren like a joke. He thought for a moment, then turned on his toes and strolled to the bathroom. He looked into the mirror and thought that it wasn't as strange as he had thought. Although it didn't make him look like a pure and beautiful girl, it wasn't as bad as looking like a monster either. Samuel stroked his chin and again remembered the look in Matthew's eyes when he kissed his ankle just now. He couldn't quite put his finger on what kind of look it was, but instinctively he was a bit scared. In front of him, Matthew had always been gentle and steady, the kind of person who would stand in front of him even if the sky were to fall. But he didn't think about it any further. He washed his face in the bathroom and then went to get the baked pumpkin pie. While waiting for the pumpkin pie to cool down a bit, the brief confusion he had just felt dissipated like a cloud of smoke. Leo was very skilled. The pumpkin pie was sweet and soft but not greasy. Samuel and Matthew shared the whole plate together. Samuel had already taken off that dress and put on his jeans again. While doing his homework, he said to Matthew, "You know, with the skills my dad has, why be a professor? He'd be more popular if he opened a restaurant." As he said this, he burst out laughing and started to expose his dad's shortcomings to Matthew. "Last year, my dad was secretly criticized by students on their anonymous forum because the exam papers he set were too difficult and a third of the students failed." Matthew had already finished his own homework and was concentrating on checking Samuel's, answering absent-mindedly a couple of times. He had already noticed that it was as if there was a repair mechanism in Samuel's mind. No matter what ambiguous moves he made, Samuel would always firmly remember the fact that he and Matthew were the best of buddies, and firmly suppressed that little bit of ambiguity. Matthew didn't know whether to be happy or not. He took another sip of his coffee. There was no sugar in his coffee, and it was very bitter. Samuel clearly only liked drinking milky coffee, but he joined in the fun and took a sneaky sip, his face wrinkling up almost into a bun. This made Matthew laugh again. Samuel and Matthew stayed at home until 7 o'clock, had dinner, and then went to school for the evening self-study session. When they arrived at school, they happened to meet Lucas right at the school gate. Lucas was quite enthusiastic towards them and came over to chat with Samuel. But when Samuel looked at Lucas's eyes, there was an indescribable subtlety. He thought to himself, "Buddy, you know what? If it weren't for me, it would be you wearing the dress." He had already sent the dress to the charity recycling station just now, lying that it was something Gianna didn't want. Lucas didn't know and was still discussing the upcoming autumn sports meeting with him, asking him, "Are you good at sports? I heard Anthony say that you're not bad at playing ball." Samuel actually wanted to boost his own image a bit, but considering that the physical education classes of Class 2 and Class 3 are often held together, even if he were to brag about this, it would be exposed. Samuel shook his head honestly. "I'm just okay at playing ball. I still need my elder brother to cooperate with me on the court. I'm not good at either long-distance running or short-distance running," Samuel said. "But Matthew is really good. He was the first in the 3,000-meter race last year." Lucas had an impression. He took a look at Matthew and sighed that people are really different from each other. It's already bad enough that he crushes others in academics, but how could he not even leave others a way out in sports? He comforted Samuel. "It's okay. I'm just okay at short-distance running. Long-distance running is a killer for me." While they were talking, they arrived at the teaching building for Senior 2. Lucas entered Class 3 and waved to Samuel and Matthew. "I'll play ball with you guys next time." "Sure," Samuel replied, probably knowing that his special task was too much. The tasks assigned by 007 afterwards were quite harmless. It was either asking them to take a walk hand in hand or to feed each other chocolates. Since wearing the short skirt, Samuel felt that his soul had achieved a qualitative leap. In his opinion, such tasks were a piece of cake. Originally, he and Matthew were inseparable, so he completed them without any pressure and easily earned another few dozen points. It was almost within reach for him to save his life. Samuel even secretly suspected that the system had been changed, but as soon as he thought so in his mind, the system 007 said coldly in his mind, "I'm sorry. It's still me. I didn't meet your expectations." Samuel wasn't embarrassed either and continued the conversation naturally. "I thought so. Besides you, which system would be so kind and considerate? If 007 had eyes to roll, I'm afraid it could roll its eyes to the back of its head." Time passed by and soon it was the National Day. When they were in Senior 1 last year, they actually had a 7-day holiday. It was said that some students had complained to the Education Bureau, protesting against the excessive makeup classes in the school. So it benefited the vast number of students. But obviously there were no such brave students to step forward this year. So William announced happily for the National Day, "The school is still very kind and has decided to give you 3 days off. But in my opinion, wouldn't 2 days off be enough? You're already in Senior 2. Why are you still thinking about playing all day long?" But before he could finish his words, he was drowned out by the loud shouts from below. "How inhumane. What about the promised 7-day holiday? 3 days is nothing for the National Day. I'm eagerly longing to celebrate the birthday of our motherland. Teacher, since the vacation is already so short, please don't assign any homework." For a moment, it was like a scene of chaos in the classroom. Samuel was also among them, pounding on the desks and knocking on the pencil boxes, determined to create an air of a valiant uprising. William was speechless at these disrespectful students. He snorted and said, 7 days off? That would make you all lazybones. Do you think you're still primary school students? The homework won't be any less. Don't even think about it." The wails from below grew even louder. Anyone who didn't know what was going on would have thought something tragic had happened here. Fortunately, although William refused to let them off easily, the teachers of the other subjects were more merciful. On average, this National Day didn't seem so gloomy after all, especially Luna, who taught English. She was the youngest and had a good relationship with them. Knowing that these naughty kids wouldn't do their homework properly anyway, she simply assigned half a test paper. "But you must do this half test paper carefully," she said, walking out on her high heels with a clicking sound. The students in the class stuck their heads out one by one and shouted, "The teacher is so nice. She's nothing like William." Luna almost stumbled. These guys even knew how to compare and contrast now. There were still more than half an hour left before school ended. and no teacher came to take over the class. So they were left to study by themselves. But no one was in the mood to study at all. The 3-day vacation was neither long nor short. Samuel hadn't figured out what he wanted to do yet. He asked Anthony and Ethan beside him, "How are you going to spend the National Day?" Anthony didn't even look up and said, "Playing online games together in the internet cafe." That was really unimaginative. Samuel felt bored. Instead, Ella in front of him turned around and asked Samuel, "Do you want to go to the movies? Su-chien and I are going to have dinner and then watch a movie. Do you guys want to come along?" She was talking to Samuel and Matthew. Su-chien had a bit of a crush on Matthew, but it hadn't reached the point where she wanted to confess her feelings. She was eager to give her friend a helping hand. But it was Anthony beside them who eagerly replied, "Sure. What movie are we going to watch?" He liked Ella. Although Matthew seemed to be indifferent to everything, he was actually quite clear about the complicated feelings among these teenagers. Seeing Anthony circling around Ella with a cheeky grin, he couldn't help but feel a bit like he was watching the fun. Compared with Anthony, he suddenly felt that he was already very lucky to have fallen in love with Samuel. It was also at this moment that the voice of 007 rang out again in the minds of him and Samuel. "Special mission. Please ask the host Samuel and the host Matthew to go to the movies together." And Samuel is required to present roses to Matthew and feed Matthew popcorn with his own hands. The score for this item is 20. Please consider whether to accept it within 1 minute. Hosts, Samuel put on a crying face, gently knocked his forehead on the table, and said in a voice that only Matthew could hear, "This system is getting more and more tricky. It even asks me to feed popcorn. Can I feed it some fireworks instead?" 007 became even colder and reminded, "There are still 30 seconds. Accept, accept, accept." Samuel chose to accept without hesitation. So that night, when the 6 of them went to the movies together, Samuel unblinkingly chose the couple seats in the last row for himself and Matthew. Ella had originally wanted to push Su-chien to sit beside Matthew, but when she turned around and saw Samuel's flamboyant moves, she was simply speechless. She asked Samuel in disbelief, "Can you and Matthew separate for even just 1 second? Samuel held Matthew's hand without any fear and said arrogantly, "Me and my Matthew can't be separated for even a moment." Although Su-chien didn't get to sit with her male god, she wasn't depressed. Instead, she looked at Samuel and burst out laughing. She pulled Ella to sit in the front rows together, and Anthony and Ethan also sat beside them. When the movie was about to start, Matthew asked Samuel, "Where are my roses?" Samuel blew a soft whistle, "Beg me and I'll give them to you." Matthew pressed an ice-cold cola against Samuel's face on purpose to chill him. "Please," Matthew said. Matthew's voice was very low, sounding hoarse and sexy in this dim movie theater, almost as if it was ringing right in Samuel's ears. Samuel coughed once, feeling a bit uncomfortable for some reason. He quickly pulled out a red square piece of paper from his pocket. His slender fingers moved nimbly, and soon he folded a quite presentable rose and handed it to Matthew. "For you," Samuel said to Matthew with a smile. "This is the first time in my life that I've given someone a rose. Cherish it." Matthew took the rose from his hand. The rose was about the same size as a normal flower. Against the red of the rose, Matthew's hand looked even whiter. He asked Samuel, "Did you learn it from Gianna? When did you ever see Gianna folding roses?" Samuel said in a low voice, "I saw it on TV. I originally wanted to learn it to please my future wife. I didn't expect to present it to you first." Matthew chuckled softly, accepted the rose, and stuffed it into the pocket close to his heart. This was also the first time he had received a rose from someone. After the movie started, Samuel and Matthew didn't talk to each other anymore. The movie was a police and gangster film, full of thrills and excitement all the way. Samuel was so engrossed in watching it that he completely forgot about feeding Matthew popcorn. He just ate it all by himself, his eyes still fixed on the screen. Matthew waited and waited, but Samuel didn't remember. Seeing that the movie was almost over, he could only remind him in a low voice, "Samuel, did you forget you had a task?" Samuel let out an "ah." It took him a while to remember that he shouldn't just eat by himself. He was in a hurry to watch the plot. He roughly grabbed a piece of popcorn and stuffed it into Matthew's mouth. But because he stuffed it too quickly, Matthew didn't have time to open his mouth, and the piece of popcorn rolled down. 007 beeped a warning, detected that the host Samuel has an improper attitude. Consider deducting points as appropriate. 007 was really something. He suspected that the system had been trying hard to deduct his points all the time. Samuel had no choice but to pick up another piece of popcorn respectfully and gently feed it to Matthew's mouth, saying, "Please have it." Fortunately, they were in the last row, and there weren't many people sitting around them, so it didn't disturb others. Matthew glanced at Samuel, then lowered his head and ate the piece of popcorn. His tongue touched Samuel's fingertip. With a gentle roll, it made Samuel's body tremble. Samuel withdrew his hand awkwardly, thinking to himself that the way he was serving Matthew now was really almost the same as serving a girlfriend. Before he could finish thinking, Matthew reached out his hand again and touched him on the corner of his mouth. "You got something stuck here." He saw Matthew leaning towards him. These days, because of doing tasks, he had developed a conditioned reflex from being kissed by Matthew. As soon as he saw Matthew leaning towards him, he subconsciously closed his eyes. He had already gotten used to having a kiss land on his lips, soft and lingering, carrying the scent of Matthew. But there wasn't. Matthew just removed the popcorn crumbs stuck to the side of his mouth, wiped gently with his fingertip along the side of his lips, and quickly withdrew. It was only after Samuel opened his eyes that he remembered there was no kissing in this special task. He couldn't help blushing, stammering, and not knowing how to explain. Fortunately, Matthew didn't seem to notice that he had closed his eyes and had already started watching the movie, so he leaned back on the seat as well, ate the remaining bit of popcorn. The movie had already reached the most exciting part of the police chasing criminals chase, but he was already a bit absent-minded. After leaving the movie theater, everyone started making arrangements for dinner. Anthony looked up and saw the paper rose stuck on Matthew's chest and said strangely, "Matthew, where did this paper origami flower come from?" Before Matthew could say anything, Samuel quickly answered. The ticket-selling sister thought he was good-looking and gave it to him. Anthony actually believed it and said enviously, "It's good to be good-looking." Then he went to Ella all clingy and hinted, "I also quite like origami." Unfortunately, Ella didn't hear him at all. She was crazily shipping the CP of the male lead and the villain in the movie with Su Qian and was arguing vehemently about issues like the top-bottom position. "The villain must be the bottom," she said firmly. While Su Qian let out a sneer, the crazy villain and the elite policeman are the perfect match. The two of them were at a stalemate, almost coming to blows on the street. Fortunately, they reconciled instantly when they saw the milk tea shop on the roadside and went hand in hand to buy the newly released caramel boba. Samuel had a confused look on his face on the side, not understanding the special expression of friendship at all, because he and Matthew would never quarrel 1 second and make up the next. After having dinner, everyone went their separate ways home and made an appointment to meet at school 3 days later. Samuel's and Matthew's homes weren't far from here, so they walked back. It was almost 10 o'clock now. The street had already passed the busiest time. They were walking on a tree-lined path. The plane trees were densely packed together, blocking the moonlight. Samuel and Matthew were holding hands, not saying a word, but there was a quiet and comfortable feeling in their hearts. Southlake Lane is a bit closer to the shopping mall and they'll get there soon. Samuel was standing at the entrance of the lane and was just about to say goodbye to Matthew when his hand was suddenly grabbed by Matthew. Looking at him, Matthew said, "Samuel, there's still one last task left for this week." Then, before Samuel could react, he pulled Samuel into his arms and gave the kiss that should have happened in the cinema. They were hiding in the shadow of the lane. Matthew was tall enough to completely cover Samuel, and above their heads were the hibiscus in full bloom, with light white and light pink flowers weighing down the branches. A few petals fell down and landed right on Samuel's shoulders. Samuel was kissed until he was in a trance. He was a straight little guy. He had never held a girl's hand nor been on a date with anyone. The most ambiguous thing he had ever done in his life was pulling the pigtails of the girl sitting in front of him in primary school. Although he had kissed Matthew more than once, under the brightly colored hibiscus, the warm and restless evening breeze of summer blew and made his heart a bit flustered. He pushed Matthew away, covered his heart, and said honestly, "Stay away from me. I'm almost made gay by your kisses." He said it openly and frankly. Straight guys are probably like this. Although his heart was pounding, and although he thought his good buddy looked extremely handsome tonight, as long as it was Matthew, he felt completely straight. Matthew twitched the corners of his mouth. Samuel was almost transparent in front of him. He could tell what Samuel was thinking just by taking a glance. "Then why don't you just turn gay and show me?" he said coldly. Samuel leaned against the wall, slouching, and his heart had calmed down. "I can't turn gay. Girls are so cute. If I liked guys, I would surely be crying and shouting to be in a relationship with you," Samuel said casually. However, he took advantage of the moonlight to look at Matthew's face carefully. The more he looked, the more he felt something was wrong. He said thoughtfully, "Tell me the truth. Have you been secretly in a relationship behind my back? How come I feel that you are so good at doing all these things?" The first time he kissed Matthew, he felt that the other was too skilled and calm. Now, after a month of all these kisses and caresses, He was even more certain of this guess. He grabbed Matthew's tie. All the tenderness and ambiguity disappeared completely. He looked at Matthew with the eyes of a policeman interrogating a criminal. Why don't you refute? Could it be true? Damn it. Do you still consider me your brother? You promised to show me your partner first if you had one. Matthew was almost laughed out of anger by Samuel. He felt that he could be called excellent in other aspects in his life, but his judgment of people was really problematic. How could he have fallen for such an annoying guy who did nothing but annoy him all day long? He rescued his tie from Samuel's hand and looked at Samuel sarcastically. Just calculate it yourself. Except when I'm sleeping. When am I not with you? Where would I find the time to fall in love with someone? Samuel thought about it and realized it was true. Actually, Matthew was often with him even when sleeping. However, he still remained suspicious. Maybe you're in an online relationship? Matthew couldn't bear it anymore and pinched Samuel's chubby cheeks. Do you think I'm like you? Samuel's mouth was crooked from the pinch and he mumbled indistinctly, ouch. What's wrong with you? You're so fierce just because I asked you a couple of questions. Matthew pinched even harder. The two of them fooled around under the tree for a while. Then Samuel picked up his school bag that had fallen beside him again and waved at Matthew. I'm going back. You should go back early too. I'll go to visit my grandma with my parents tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. There'll be no one at home. If you really miss me, just give me a call. Samuel wasn't being narcissistic. He knew very well that if there was anyone in this world who could make Matthew open up his heart, it should be the 4 people in his own family. Matthew's biological mother could also be counted as one, but unfortunately she was far away in a foreign country. When he thought of this, he felt a bit reluctant to leave. Matthew would be all alone in that empty villa, with only the bright and lively lights in the yard. Just thinking about it made his heart ache. He grabbed Matthew's hand. Why don't you come with me to my grandma's place? My grandma knows you. We even lived in her house together when we were kids. Matthew smiled, thinking that Samuel wasn't annoying at this moment but was actually quite cute and sensible. It's not easy for you guys to go and accompany your grandma for a few days. What would it look like if you took me with you? Matthew rubbed Samuel's wrist. Go and have fun. See you at school. Samuel also clasped Matthew's fingers, always feeling that he should say something more. But when he saw Matthew's eyes, he knew that Matthew wouldn't agree. Matthew could enter and leave his house at any time. But after all, his grandma wasn't Matthew's grandma. When he thought of this, he felt a bit gloomy again. For him, Matthew had already been a part of the family. No matter when it was, he didn't want to exclude Matthew. But in fact, Matthew had his own family. He and Matthew were just friends and neighbors in the end. 2 people with no blood relationship. Forget it. Anyway, I can't out-argue you. Samuel muttered dejectedly. I'm going back. Goodbye. He picked up his school bag and left. South Lake Lane was short. When he got back to the door of his own house, he looked back and saw that Matthew was still standing under that hibiscus tree. He waved his hand again before Matthew left. But Samuel didn't go in immediately either. He took a look at the courtyard next to his house. That was Matthew's home. Uncle Pay hadn't sold this house, so there was no one living in it now. Only occasionally would gardeners and housekeepers come to clean it, so the courtyard always looked desolate and bleak. But it wasn't like this in the past. When Uncle Pay and Mia hadn't divorced yet, this courtyard was also very lively. There was a swing under that towering camphor tree. His mother often carried him to visit, and he would swing on the swing with Matthew. To be precise, he was the one playing while Matthew watched him. When they got tired from playing, they would run to their respective mothers and ask for dinner. But now, all of this was gone. Only a house that would never have its lights on again and the camphor tree without a swing were left. Samuel sighed and entered the house. Sometimes, actually, he would, rather unjustifiably, feel a bit of resentment towards Uncle Pay and Mia. Actually, he didn't mind that they got divorced. Adults don't need anyone's permission to separate. After walking a certain distance together, it's okay if they part ways. But why? After they got divorced, one moved abroad and the other was only occupied with doing business. And neither of them came to accompany Matthew. He even wanted to say, if you really don't want him, just give him to me. I'll be good to Matthew. We'll be good brothers for life. I'll always be with him. But this could only be a fantasy lingering in his mind after all. Matthew was far more mature and rational than he was. He didn't need Samuel to take care of him long ago. It was just that Samuel still couldn't help but worry about him unilaterally. Samuel pushed open the door of the house. His parents and Gianna were all there, sitting on the sofa chatting. Gianna had just bought a new hat and bag and was showing them to his parents to see if they looked good. Samuel sat down on the sofa, and his father handed him a hamburger. Do you want to eat this? I made it myself. Your sister was clamoring for it. Samuel took it and said, Dad, you're like Doraemon. I was just about to have a midnight snack. His father was very proud. Your father isn't just a man who is busy with his career. I'm also good at doing housework. Otherwise, how could I have married your mother? His mother, who had been looking at the computer, couldn't help but smile when she heard this. Samuel was eating the hamburger, watching his father and mother making goo-goo eyes at each other, and felt his teeth were going to be soured by it. He had been watching his parents being so deeply in love while growing up. Therefore, he had an instinctive expectation for falling in love, starting a family and raising children, because in his impression, all these were extremely wonderful and happy things. It's just that he was still in high school after all, and didn't have a clear plan for the future. So these things were just a vague shadow, lingering faintly in his heart. Early the next morning, Samuel followed his parents to his grandmother's house and was going to spend the whole national day there. His grandmother's house was in the neighboring city, only an hour and a half's drive away from their home. As soon as Samuel and Gianna got out of the car, they were warmly hugged and had their cheeks pinched by their grandmother who was waiting at the door. But he didn't expect that there were guests at his grandmother's house. It was a boy a few years older than him, sitting under the grapevine in the yard writing. He was quite tall, with deep and handsome features, and his skin was slightly tanned. He looked a bit cool, but surprisingly cheerful when he smiled. "Hello, I'm Su Yuan Fan," the boy said with a smile, reaching out his hand to him. Samuel also reached out his hand, but in his heart he was quite bothered that the other's hand was a whole circle bigger than his, which made him look rather skinny. "I'm Samuel," he said. After being introduced by his grandmother, Samuel learned that this boy was a student learning calligraphy from his grandmother, and they were on very good terms. During these 2 days of holiday, he came to his grandmother's place to have classes and also for fun. Yuan Fan is a student at S University. His grandmother introduced to the two of them. "He's a few years older than you, and he's a very good student. You two should be able to get along well." Samuel just smiled at Su Yuan Fan. He wasn't that curious about this person, just having an instinctive politeness. But Gianna, that little fangirl, secretly let out a wow beside him. "So handsome," Gianna whispered to him. He deliberately asked Gianna, "So you don't want brother Matthew anymore?" Gianna waved her hand grandly. "Only kids make choices. Adults, of course, want them all." Samuel almost split his sides laughing. He ruffled Gianna's hair. "How come you're an adult already? You're only 15 this year." "Okay." Gianna ignored him and quickly went shopping with their grandmother. Grandmother liked buying clothes for little girls the most. Every time Gianna came, she would buy several outfits for her. Samuel didn't like shopping. He'd rather stay at home. His parents were also going to visit the friends his mother knew, and they drove away too. Well, now it was good. There were only Samuel and this newly met Su Yuan Fan left in the house. The two of them stared at each other for a while. Finally, it was Samuel who spoke first and said politely, "Your handwriting is quite good." Su Yuan Fan burst out laughing because Samuel obviously looked like he was making small talk. "It's okay. I learned it from your grandmother, but I haven't mastered even 1/10 of her skills." Samuel thought to himself, "Well, that's for sure. My grandmother is a calligrapher and she's really good." But he still remained cordial enough and said, "It's okay. I think it's great. My handwriting looks like a dog scratching. My grandmother never taught me." "Why?" Su Yuan Fan was a bit curious. Shouldn't the grandson have an advantage? Samuel scratched his face, feeling a bit embarrassed. "Because I didn't want to learn when I was a kid. Whenever my grandmother gave me a writing brush, I would break it. After breaking about a dozen of them, she spanked me and then gave up." He still remembered how angry his grandmother was. Su Yuan Fan laughed heartily. Samuel felt a bit humiliated and didn't want to talk anymore. But Su Yuan Fan said, "I'm the same as you. My father is really good at playing chess and taught me since I was a kid. But I didn't want to learn, so I threw all the chess pieces into the river." Samuel was quite surprised because Su Yuan Fan looked really smart, just like Matthew, with an air of a top student. "I really didn't notice that," he muttered. Su Yuan Fan laughed and said, "What's the big deal? When I was a kid, I gave my father relatively little trouble. But when I started school, he had a headache because I got into fights all the time and the school would ask the parents to come." Samuel was even more shocked, but when he looked at Su Yuan Fan's strong and muscular arms, he didn't find it too strange anymore. After all, he looked really strong. He pinched his own arm and said enviously, "You look really tough. I'm no good at fighting. I always rely on my childhood friend to save me." The two of them started chatting without realizing it. Su Yuan Fan is quite an interesting person. He's really a top student. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to enter S University. Samuel could ask him anything and he could answer it. He could even guide Samuel with his homework. But he was obviously not the kind of well-behaved good student. He was involved in fighting and skipping classes, and did everything of that sort. After graduating from high school, he went to Tibet alone and stayed there for a month. When he came back, his skin was even sunburned and peeled off. After that, during his college years, he traveled all over the country and was hardly ever at home. Samuel was getting more and more excited as he listened. Actually, except for not being good at studying, he was quite well behaved in other aspects. Hearing that Su Yuanfan had so many interesting experiences, Samuel was very envious. When he heard that Su Yuanfan knew Sansho, a form of Chinese martial arts, he exclaimed with an "oh," and admiration was already showing in his eyes. By the time Su Yuanfan went home in the evening, Samuel was already quite familiar with him and even asked him to come and play again the next day. Su Yuanfan looked at him and laughed straight away. "Why are you like a little puppy, getting so close to people so easily?" Samuel got unhappy. "You can't say that about me. I don't like it." Actually, Matthew had also said that he was like a little puppy, but he didn't mind it. But when Su Yuanfan said that, he just didn't like to hear it and felt that it was humiliating. Su Yuanfan was even more amused. He thought this kid was really fun. "Okay, I won't say it. See you tomorrow." Su Yuanfan waved goodbye to him and left alone. Before going to bed at night, Samuel couldn't wait to call Matthew. He had just chatted with his grandmother for a long time and finally managed to get back to his own room. The phone rang for only a few seconds before it was picked up, as if Matthew had been waiting by it all the time. Matthew said, "Why are you calling so late?" Samuel lay on the bed. "I guessed you weren't asleep. You hardly ever go to bed before 12 o'clock any day." Matthew just laughed. Samuel chattered away to Matthew about what had happened during the day, from his grandmother saying that he had lost weight and stuffing him with food like crazy, to the little cat at his grandmother's house having grown into a big cat. Fortunately, it still recognized him. "You even held that cat when you were little, but it's so fat now. It's an old cat," Samuel said. "I fed it dried fish in the afternoon and it just kept circling around my feet." Matthew listened very patiently, with an unconscious smile on the corners of his mouth. But when he heard Samuel mention that he had met a college student named Su Yuanfan and praised the person several times, he stopped smiling. He thought to himself, how could Samuel have just been out for a while and already gotten to know some neighbor brother? However, Samuel had no idea what he was thinking and was still saying, "If there's a chance, I'd like to introduce you to. You're both straight-A students and you'll surely get along. Moreover, he also practices Sansho, just like you." Matthew twitched the corners of his mouth and said, "No, thanks. I'm not interested." He didn't see how he was anything like the Su Yuanfan. Samuel didn't take it to heart either. He just thought it was a case of one straight-A student looking down on another. He even made fun of Matthew, saying, "You're so arrogant. You're not as amiable as Su Yuanfan at all." Matthew didn't like what he heard and changed the topic. "Where are you going with your uncle and aunt tomorrow? Are you still staying with grandma?" Unexpectedly, Samuel said, "I'm going hiking with Su Yuanfan tomorrow." Suddenly, he kind of regretted not going to grandma's house with Samuel. So what if he was being thick-skinned? It was better than listening to Samuel running off with someone else. It had only been half a day and he already had a new brother. In another 2 days, would he be wearing a cuckold's horns? But he couldn't bring himself to tell Samuel not to go. He could only remain silent for a while before saying, "Then come back early." Samuel laughed on the other end of the phone. "Do you miss me already?" Matthew let out a soft sigh in his heart. From the moment he and Samuel parted, he had started to miss him. But when he said it out loud, he could only say it lightly. "Yes, I miss you. Then I'll try to be back the morning after tomorrow." Samuel said cheerfully, "I'll bring you some local specialties." Matthew replied with a sound, a bit reluctant to hang up the phone. But when he glanced at the time, it was already time for Samuel to go to bed. So he said softly again, "Go to sleep. Don't you have to get up early tomorrow?" Samuel let out an "oh" and reluctantly hung up the phone. Samuel went climbing with Su Yuanfan the next day. Actually, he had been to this mountain when he was a kid. It was just that the tourism industry hadn't developed back then. Unlike now, there are long stone paths built on the mountain. When reaching the top of the mountain, various shops and tourists taking posed photos can be seen everywhere. There was a small temple built on the mountain at some unknown time. The place isn't big, but thanks to the nice scenery in the temple, there are a lot of people coming here to take pictures for showing off. However, fortunately, this place hasn't become an internet-famous scenic spot yet, so although there are more tourists than before, it hasn't reached a terrifying level. Samuel leaned on the railing, drinking frozen juice, and said to Su Yuanfan, "Next time when I'm on vacation, I'll come here again with Matthew." He still had a childish temper. Whenever he saw something he thought was fun, he would share it with Matthew. Fortunately, Matthew didn't find him annoying. Su Yuanfan had been hearing Samuel mention Matthew since yesterday. Although he hadn't even seen a glimpse of this Matthew, he already knew that Matthew was 185 centimeters tall, a top student who always ranked in the top 3 in the grade. He could play the piano and the violin, was excellent at playing ball games and long-distance running, and was also extremely handsome. In a word, he was just perfect. Now that Samuel mentioned it again, Su Yuanfan finally couldn't help but tease Samuel. Is he really your childhood friend? Hearing you keep thinking about him. Those who don't know might think he's your girlfriend. Samuel didn't think much of it when he heard that. Instead, he curled his lips and said, I don't have a girlfriend yet. But then he looked at Su Yuanfan curiously and asked, what about you? You look so good looking. You must have a partner, right? Su Yuanfan just smiled as if he had heard something interesting. I don't have a girlfriend either, he said. Samuel showed a very surprised expression, staring at Su Yuanfan's face to see if he was lying. But Su Yuanfan's eyes were very calm and natural. Samuel believed him and asked, is it because your standards are too high? Su Yuanfan didn't answer. Instead, he patted Samuel on the head and said, kid, don't ask too many questions. Samuel stopped asking. Although he thought he wasn't a kid anymore, he was already 17. He would become an adult in a few months. Although he was a bit short, there was still room for growth. He followed Su Yuanfan to tour around the whole mountain. After a round of playing, it was already evening. The sunset glow today was very beautiful. Looking from the top of the mountain, it was a magnificent pinkish purple. Before he went down the mountain, he saw that the cultural and creative store in front of the temple was selling embroidered amulets for praying for good fortune. Although he didn't really believe in such things, he still took out his money and bought one. Su Yuanfan took a look and found that this one was for academic fortune. So he teased him, are you going to start studying hard? Through tutoring Samuel with his homework yesterday, he had already discovered the essence of Samuel being a poor student. Samuel said that it was not the case. He sat in Su Yuanfan's car. Because he was a little tired, he leaned his head against the car window, and outside the window was the sunset glow, which made the outline of his face look a bit softer. I bought it for Matthew. He got the second place in the grade last time. I hope he can get the first place next time. Samuel said this and couldn't help but smile. He held the small amulet tightly in his hand. It was clearly such a rough little thing, but he thought that as long as it was brought back by him, Matthew would be happy to accept it. And Su Yuanfan parked the car at the crossroads of the traffic lights, looking at Samuel's fair side face. When he heard Samuel's words, his eyes looked a bit complicated for a moment. When the car started again, he said softly, you really like him a lot. But his words were so soft that Samuel didn't hear them clearly. After Samuel was sent home by Su Yuanfan, he enthusiastically invited him to stay for dinner. But Su Yuanfan had an appointment with his friends, so he didn't stay. He sat in the car and asked Samuel, do you still want me to pick you up to go out and play tomorrow? Samuel shook his head, showing the distressed look of a high school student. No, I won't go. I haven't even done my homework. He hadn't even done the homework assigned by William yet. Su Yuanfan smiled. He was too far away from high school life, so it was hard for him to truly understand Samuel's troubles. Then I'll go. I'll come to see you off when you go back home. He knew that Samuel would go home soon. Although his university and Samuel's home were in the same city, the city was so big that it would be hard to meet by chance without deliberately making contact. He quite liked Samuel and thought that he was a very interesting little guy. But a chance encounter that lasted only 2 or 3 days was not enough to make them really become friends who would often make appointments to meet. Samuel would go back to high school and stay with his childhood friend whom he always talked about. And he also had his own circle of friends and acquaintances. He just caught a glimpse that even the screensaver of Samuel's mobile phone was a group photo with that Matthew. He intended to remind Samuel of a couple of things. It's not common for adolescent boys to be so clingy to their childhood friends. But as soon as he saw Samuel's bewildered face, he finally said nothing and just let out a light chuckle. He only said goodbye to Samuel and drove away after Samuel entered the house. Samuel entered the house. Their dinner today was eaten sitting in the yard. Now the temperature at night was already quite cool. Samuel was sitting under the grapevine, eating the pine nut cake made by his grandmother, thinking that if there were no homework, this day would be simply perfect. But after he finished eating, he still went back to his room with a sigh, closed the door, and started doing the test papers with full energy. He was writing in extreme pain, not understanding why auxiliary lines had to be drawn, why it was so difficult to balance chemical formulas, and why that small cube in physics was sliding around. Finally, he weakly made a video call to Matthew. Just like yesterday. Matthew picked it up quickly. He probably had just taken a bath, with water droplets still on his hair. His skin was even whiter than usual, and his cheeks were slightly flushed by the steam. Looking at Matthew's face, Samuel couldn't help but burst out laughing as he didn't know why the phrase "so attractive that one could forget about food" came to his mind. Matthew looked at him in bewilderment. "What are you laughing at?" Samuel would never say it. If he did, Matthew would surely say that he was daydreaming. He lay on the table, with his cheek resting on his arm, and skillfully acted coquettishly to Matthew. "Brother, I can't do my homework. Teach me." He knew that Matthew must have already finished it, but this time Matthew didn't promise him so easily. Matthew sat on the edge of the bed, dried his hair with a towel, and asked him, "Didn't you meet a neighbor who even guided you with your homework yesterday?" He clearly remembered what Su Yuan Fan was called, but he was unwilling to mention this name. He would instinctively dislike anyone who he thought was coveting Samuel. But Samuel didn't catch on and said honestly he went to play with his friends. "I won't have time to go to him tomorrow either. Besides, Su Yuan Fan is my grandmother's student, not a neighbor. So you only think of me now. Is that it?" Matthew really wanted to ask this question in a petty way, but he also knew that he was being unreasonable. He stared at Samuel in the video for a few times. Samuel was no longer lying on the table but curled up in a single sofa, wearing a white t-shirt, idly pressing the spring on the pen back and forth, looking at him with round eyes, looking very well behaved. Matthew sighed and said, "Go ahead. Which ones don't you understand?" Samuel was as if he had been granted amnesty. He quickly found out all the questions he didn't understand just now, but there were really too many that he didn't know. He was a little embarrassed when showing them to Matthew. Matthew found out the questions that Samuel didn't understand on his own test paper, roughly screened them, and didn't explain the ones that were too difficult. He picked out the ones of medium difficulty one by one to explain clearly to Samuel. Samuel thought that just for the patience Matthew showed in tutoring him, he should be very successful if he became a teacher in the future, or when Matthew had children in the future, he would surely be a good father. He thought so and also said so. Matthew, however, sneered on the phone, "Forget it. What if my son is like you?" "I'd be furious." Samuel was stunned. "Why would your son be like me?" Matthew then realized that he had said something he shouldn't have. His pen gently scratched a mark on the test paper. "Nothing. Just something I said casually. I was confused by you." Samuel didn't care either. Under Matthew's guidance, he finally finished all his homework with difficulty. Except for an essay. He planned to leave it until tomorrow night to write. "I'm sleepy. I'm going to bed." He yawned and mumbled to Matthew, "I'll be back tomorrow. Remember to wait for me at my place." Matthew's eyes and brows were gentle as he said, "Okay." The two of them sat on each end of the phone for a while longer. Clearly there was nothing else to do, but they didn't hang up the phone. The chirping of insects outside the window came one after another, transmitted to Matthew through Samuel's phone speaker, as if the two of them were still sitting under the same night sky. Matthew remembered what Samuel's grandmother's house looked like. He went there with the Shin family when he was very young. It was an old courtyard with grapevines in it. The ground was paved with blue stone slabs. He and Samuel watched the stars and caught fireflies together in the courtyard. The two of them sat like this for a while, one reading a book and the other doing homework, chatting a few words occasionally. It was not until the call was hung up that Samuel noticed that he had scrawled the character "pay" randomly on the paper, sloppy and casual, hidden among the lines he had doodled. Samuel didn't arrive home until evening. Originally, he was supposed to leave in the morning. However, his grandmother couldn't bear to part with them and asked them to stay a little longer. Samuel had already packed his bags, but he couldn't help sitting on either side of his grandmother with Gianna and chatting with her. Before they knew it, they had eaten lunch. Before going back, Samuel sent a text message to Matthew. So when the car drove into South Lake Lane, Matthew was already standing at the entrance of his house. Samuel saw him through the car window and couldn't help smiling. As soon as his father stopped the car, he couldn't wait to open the car door, rushed over quickly, and threw himself into Matthew's arms. Samuel wasn't heavy, but a 175-centimeter tall boy was by no means light either. However, Matthew caught him steadily. "Have you been waiting for a long time?" Samuel asked. "Not for long." Matthew lied. "I've just been here for a few minutes." Samuel didn't quite believe it, but he didn't expose him either. He just hugged Matthew and said, "I brought back some snacks made by grandmother. She even asked about you and wondered why you didn't come. Come with me next time." Matthew said with a smile that he would, and then waited to help Samuel's parents with their luggage. But by the time they had already exchanged quite a few words, Samuel's parents had just parked the car in the garage. Gianna walked slowly out of the car, with a strawberry candied haw on her mouth. Looking at the way her brother and Matthew were being all affectionate and clingy together, she complained, "My brother is so exaggerated. Anyone who doesn't know would think that he and brother Matthew have been separated for 3 years." Emily smiled and said, "The time your brother has known Matthew is 2 years longer than the time he has known you. Of course, their relationship is close." Gianna thought about it and realized it was true. Then she also ran to eat the snacks. In the evening, Matthew naturally stayed at Samuel's house. After having dinner, Samuel wrote the last composition. His Chinese grades were not bad. It was one of the subjects in which he got relatively high scores. If his handwriting wasn't so messy like a puppy scratching randomly, perhaps the teacher would have given him a few more points for the neatness of the paper. So Matthew supervised him practicing writing again. Samuel wasn't happy about it. He thought it was like an extra class and protested with grumbles. But his mouth was blocked by the pudding that Matthew fed him. But after eating the pudding, he still said to Matthew, "You're so annoying." Annoying it may be. Matthew sat beside him, watching him muttering with his mouth while not writing any fewer words with his hands. In his heart, he just thought Samuel was so cute. Moreover, throughout the whole evening today, he didn't hear the 3 words "Su Yuan Fan" from Samuel's mouth again, which made him quite satisfied. It wasn't until just before going to bed that Samuel remembered to take out the embroidered amulet pouch he had bought. The one he picked was in his favorite blue color, with golden ginkgo leaves embroidered on it. Inside the pouch were folded talisman papers. Couldn't be called exquisite, but it was still simple and elegant. "I bought this for you. It can boost your academic performance." Samuel tied it onto Matthew's bag. "You were second in the grade last time. Next time, you'll be first." After tying it on, Samuel thought his taste wasn't bad. Matthew's bag was black, and it didn't look out of place with this little thing on it. Matthew fiddled with the small embroidered pouch and asked Samuel, "Didn't you buy one for yourself?" Samuel knew himself well. "I'll pass. Even the bodhisattva can't save me." Matthew was a bit helpless. He looked at Samuel and felt a bit headache for a moment. Sometimes he wanted to force Samuel to study hard, doing 10 questions if he couldn't do one, thinking that even the clumsy way could improve his grades. But sometimes he just couldn't bear to do that. Why should Samuel have to work so hard? Samuel was already good enough. Even if he wasn't quick at learning, it wouldn't prevent him from living a happy life. And he would always be by Samuel's side, working hard for both of them. He would take good care of Samuel all his life. Matthew stroked the stray hairs on Samuel's forehead, feeling that he really had no way to deal with him. In the end, he could only urge Samuel to go to bed early. If the grades couldn't be improved, that would be bad enough. At least he should be in good health. But Samuel had slept in the car in the afternoon and tossed and turned for quite a while without being able to fall asleep. In the end, it was only when Matthew held him in his arms that he calmed down. The next morning, Samuel had a really hard time getting up. Even when he was sitting in the classroom, his eyelids were still drooping and he was leaning listlessly on Matthew. The others weren't very awake either. They either stayed up late watching dramas or playing games the night before. On the first day back at school after the National Day holiday, the whole class was filled with an air of laziness. As soon as William entered the classroom, he frowned deeply, with a look of extreme distress on his face. "I told you we shouldn't have given you 3 days off. You're in senior 2 now. Wouldn't 2 days off have been enough?" However, there wasn't even anyone who contradicted him. Everyone looked at him lazily. Obviously, they hadn't yet retrieved their souls from the vacation. With an air of being detached from the worldly affairs, William was at his wits' end too, and he couldn't quite bear to make the whole class stand during the class. So he could only open all the windows and raise his voice as much as possible to give the lecture. It took Samuel half a class to fully wake up. He and Matthew were sitting by the window. The morning breeze blew aside a few strands of his bangs in front of his forehead, and his beautiful eyes were completely exposed, looking moist brown in the sunlight. He dutifully took notes following the blackboard. Occasionally, when his mind wandered, he would draw stick figures on the notebook. On the contrary, Matthew hardly picked up his pen, only adding a couple of strokes casually at the key points. And after the morning exercise, during the big break, some students in the whole class were catching up on sleep, while others were chatting. Suddenly, William walked in through the back door and walked straight towards the corner where Samuel and Matthew were. Samuel was eating a small biscuit. When he saw William, the piece of biscuit got stuck in his throat. He literally didn't know whether to swallow it or not. He frantically recalled that he didn't seem to have caused any trouble. He should not be chased by William, right? Fortunately, William's target wasn't him. William just gave him a glance and reproached him lightly but not too severely. "Skipping breakfast again? Do you have to wait until you're at school to eat?" Samuel got choked by the biscuit and was drinking water frantically to catch his breath. He could only show his innocence with his eyes. William didn't bother to argue with him much either. He handed a form to Matthew with a smile. "Do you know what I'm looking for you for?" Matthew took the form and gave a rather formulaic smile. "Yes, thank you, teacher." That was the registration form for the final selection of the math competition he had participated in before. He had passed the first round of the competition and was now eligible to participate in the provincial competition, but he wasn't really that thrilled in his heart. He had already known his approximate results before. It was just that William looked so jubilant and full of gratification that he had to show some respect anyway. It was Samuel who was extremely excited. Restrained by William's presence, he didn't dare to make any big moves. He just quietly punched Matthew on the knee and mouthed the words, "You're awesome, bro." Matthew smiled again. This time, he was amused by Samuel. William was unaware of the undercurrents between the two of them. Like an old farmer celebrating a bountiful harvest, he looked at Matthew with gratification and patted him on the shoulder. "Work hard. For this provincial competition, only 5 students from our school have been selected. Later, we will have a joint training session with several other schools once, and then the competition will follow after the training." After saying that, William encouraged Matthew a few more times and then walked away contentedly with his hands behind his back. And as soon as William left, Samuel threw himself on Matthew. "Bro, you're amazing. Was your score really high?" He looked eagerly at Matthew, even more excited than when he himself made progress in an exam. Matthew hugged him. The registration form he had just filled out was casually tossed in a corner of the table and didn't receive much attention. However, the way Samuel was looking at him with all his heart and eyes made him feel warm and comfortable from the bottom of his heart. Yes, Samuel was even happier and slapped Matthew on the back. "I think the embroidered pouch I bought yesterday was quite useful. You're sure to get into the national competition." Matthew patted him on the head. "Thanks for your kind words." Soon, before school was over, almost everyone in the class knew that Matthew had made it to the provincial competition. Anthony and Ethan were pounding on the table, asking Matthew to treat them, and the others also took the opportunity to join in the fun, almost lifting the roof off. Samuel spat at them. "No way. You bunch of big eaters will eat the restaurant out of business." The others all booed him. Some people just want to go on a candlelit dinner with Matthew and have him all to themselves. Anthony pounded on the table and started to heckle. "Brothers, sisters, can we agree to that? Isn't Matthew everyone's?" "Yes." Now the girls also started to shout along. The male god was, of course, everyone's, the common property of Class 2, Grade 11. Samuel wasn't happy about it. He clung to Matthew and wouldn't get down. "Go away. Go away. My brother is mine alone. No lending." But despite all the joking around, Samuel didn't really stop Matthew from treating them. The relationships among these guys were all quite good. It was common for them to treat each other on their birthdays. Finally, they went to a hot pot restaurant outside the school. It was already cold outside, and it was especially comfortable to eat something hot. However, when a group of teenagers got together, especially outside the school, there was naturally no discipline. First, only Anthony had ordered beer, but later everyone wanted to drink. So they ordered another pitcher. Matthew didn't care. He could drink white liquor without any problem, but Samuel's alcohol tolerance was really low. Yet he still clung to his glass and wouldn't let go. "Just one glass," he said, looking pitifully at Matthew with his round eyes. "Just like a little squirrel." Matthew pursed his lips, not wanting to agree. The others all remained silent, waiting to watch the fun, especially the girls, who had even taken out their mobile phones, waiting to take videos. Finally, Matthew conceded defeat and took a step back, saying, "Only half a cup." Immediately, there were jeers in the private room. The family tradition of the Matthew family is on the wane. He can't keep Samuel in check. Matthew is useless. Where will the parents' face be? His dignity is completely lost. "Samuel, have a couple more drinks. What's the point of just half a cup?" Everyone was just fanning the flames. Matthew pinched the bridge of his nose with a headache, thinking that he had never been able to control Samuel in his life. However, Samuel became lively again in an instant. He thought to himself that although Matthew said it was only half a cup, he couldn't keep an eye on him all the time. In the end, Samuel still had a full cup. He was drinking blended beer, so the alcohol content was a bit higher. By the time he walked out of the hot pot restaurant again, Samuel was already a bit unsteady on his feet. He was quite obedient though, being led by Matthew, going wherever he was told to go. He ignored the others when they teased him, just following Matthew wholeheartedly, like a puppy recognizing its owner. with red cheeks, only grinning foolishly at Matthew. Matthew held him with one hand and paid the bill at the bar with the other. Then he turned around and resignedly asked Samuel, "Can you walk?" Samuel took a moment to understand and nodded slowly. He was a bit drunk, but not so drunk that he lost consciousness. "You guys go ahead. I'll walk slowly with him at the back," Matthew said to the others. "Matthew, can you manage on your own? Shall we help you drag him back?" Ethan asked, even flexing his muscular biceps. Matthew shook his head and said, "I can manage on my own." The others didn't insist anymore either. They left in twos and threes. Su Qian and Ella even deliberately bought honey water and stuffed it to Samuel, asking him to drink it to sober up. Matthew entered the back gate of the school by using his good looks. Samuel was a bit drunk and definitely couldn't climb over the wall. He wrapped Samuel in his long coat, picked him up horizontally in his arms, and calmly told the guard that Samuel had a stomachache just now and that he had accompanied Samuel to the hospital, which was why they were back late. Samuel's head was buried in the thin black overcoat, only showing the back of his black head. Matthew told him not to talk, and he didn't say a word, but he rubbed his head against Matthew's neck, breathing the hot air of drunkenness all over it. Matthew's expression remained unchanged, but his hands holding Samuel tightened slightly. The guard gave them a suspicious look and finally let them in. "Remember to get a leave note next time," he muttered. Matthew nodded and walked away with Samuel in his arms.